Across the sun-scorched landscapes of medieval Iberia, life unfolded under a sky that rarely offered mercy. The land stretched in endless shades of yellow and brown, its surfaces cracked from months of burning heat. For the people who lived there, every season carried its own struggle. Summer arrived like a hammer, spoiling fresh food almost as soon as it was made. Milk soured in hours. Meat turned in a single afternoon. Even bread grew hard in the dry wind. Winter, though less brutal, brought long stretches of scarcity where every crumb mattered. In these harsh conditions, survival depended on wisdom learned through generations. And among the many small tools people created to endure their unforgiving world, there was one humble mixture that quietly shaped daily life more than almost anything else: goat cheese brine. It did not look impressive. It did not smell special. But from lonely shepherd huts in Castile to the busy streets of Al-Andalus, nearly everyone relied on it as a shield against hunger, rot, and waste. The climate of the Iberian Peninsula left very little room for error. Fresh dairy, especially goat milk, was incredibly delicate. A hot afternoon could ruin an entire day's work, leaving families with nothing to show for hours of milking. And because there was no refrigeration, no cool storage, no safe way to keep milk fresh for long, every household constantly walked a thin line between nourishment and loss. Goats, however, were the perfect animals for the rugged hills and rocky plains of Iberia. They survived where cattle could not, climbing steep slopes and feeding on shrubs that grew in dry soil. For countless families, goats were the main source of milk and therefore the main source of protein. But this treasure came with a problem. Goat milk spoiled even faster than cow milk. What poured warm and fresh from the goat could become unusable by the next sunrise. This fragility forced people to innovate, and the solution they created, submerging cheese in salted water, changed everything. Brining slowed down what the heat tried to speed up. Instead of turning soft and sour in a day, brined goat cheese could last for weeks or even months. The salt in the water pushed back against the growth of bacteria, acting as a natural barrier that protected food without needing cold temperatures. With brine, families no longer needed to rush to eat their cheese before it spoiled. They could set aside food for the future, create reserves, and face the long seasons of scarcity with a bit more confidence. Brine transformed goat cheese from a fragile resource into a stable, dependable foundation of the medieval diet. Suddenly, what had once been fragile became strong enough to carry across great distances, survive hot weather, and remain edible during the hardest times. For a rural household scattered across the hills and valleys of Iberia, brined goat cheese meant security. In villages where people lived far from markets, having food that stayed fresh was nothing short of life-saving. During blistering summers when goats produced less milk and fields dried into dust, brine cheese kept families alive. During unexpected droughts, when harvests failed and water grew scarce, those clay jars filled with salted cheese became a quiet form of protection. Traveling shepherds depended on brine cheese as they moved with their herds from one pasture to another. Days under the burning sun did not bother the cheese. Its salt shield kept it from spoiling. While fresh food wilted and rotted on the trail, brine cheese remained solid, salty, and ready to eat. It became the perfect traveling companion, small enough to carry and strong enough to last. The effectiveness of brining in medieval Iberia was strengthened by one crucial advantage: salt was everywhere. The peninsula held some of the richest salt sources in all of Europe. Along the coastlines, great salt works spread across Cadiz, Ibiza, and Setúbal, where workers collected salt through solar evaporation. Inland, the famous Cardona salt mountain stood like a shining white giant, offering an endless supply. This abundance made salt cheap, reliable, and widely available. Unlike in Northern Europe, where salt was so scarce that it was sometimes treated like a luxury, Iberian families could attain it with ease. Salt traders carried it deep into the interior through established routes, ensuring that even small remote villages could preserve their food. Because salt flowed freely through Iberia, cheesemakers were able to refine their craft. They experimented with brine strengths, discovering which mixtures kept cheese soft and which created firmer, longer-lasting wheels. They learned how to adjust brine to the temperature of their region, how to control flavor, how to prepare cheese that could survive the hottest summers or endure storage deep into winter. These skills spread naturally as goat herding expanded across the peninsula. With every new herd, every new village, the practice of brining took deeper root. It was no longer just a method. It became a shared language of survival. Inside the simple homes of peasants, goat cheese brine played a daily role. Most families owned only a handful of goats, producing just enough milk to feed themselves. Every drop counted. After shaping their cheese, they placed the pieces into clay jars filled with brine. These jars were carefully stored in the coolest part of the house, sometimes half buried in the earth to escape the heat. The salty liquid protected the cheese from insects, dust, and the relentless sun. It preserved the cheese's moisture and nutrition, ensuring that the family had a steady supply of protein even when fresh milk stopped during colder months. During difficult years, when harvests failed, when rain did not fall, when food grew scarce, brine cheese often became the most dependable thing a household had. It did not spoil, it did not weaken, it waited patiently until needed. Families built their winter reserves around these jars, planning months ahead because they knew the brine would keep their food safe. In many homes, the brining jar became a symbol of resilience. It was not grand or beautiful, but it represented foresight, caution, and survival. It reminded families that even in a harsh world, small acts of preparation could make the difference between hunger and stability. In a land shaped by extreme weather and unpredictable seasons, goat cheese brine offered something rare: control. Where the sun burned crops, brine protected food. Where heat destroyed freshness, brine extended life. And where scarcity ruled daily decisions, brine gave families the power to plan, endure, and continue. Through this simple mixture of salt and water, medieval Iberia learned to transform fragility into strength and necessity into remarkable ingenuity. Beyond the walls of village homes, goat cheese brine took on an even larger role inside the monasteries scattered across medieval Iberia. These institutions were not quiet, isolated places occupied only by monks in prayer. They were busy centers of daily life, often supporting large, permanent populations of monks, lay workers, and servants. Added to this were constant streams of travelers, pilgrims, and the poor seeking food and shelter. Along major routes such as the Camino de Santiago, monasteries acted as lifelines, offering rest and nourishment in a hard and dangerous world. Feeding so many people, day after day, demanded food that could be stored, trusted, and prepared in large quantities. Brined goat cheese met all of these needs with remarkable reliability. Monks approached cheese-making with a level of discipline rarely seen elsewhere. Preservation was not left to chance. Salt was measured carefully, water ratios were adjusted, and curing times were observed with patience. Monastic communities paid close attention to how heat, humidity, and seasonal changes affected the cheese. Over time, Brining evolved from a simple household trick into a carefully refined practice. Written monastic records reveal methodical experimentation, with notes describing different brine strengths for different cheeses and climates. This knowledge allowed monks to produce cheese that behaved predictably, even under harsh conditions. It meant fewer losses, more efficient storage, and dependable meals throughout the year. Brine goat cheese became essential to monastic life. It fed monks during daily meals and sustained laborers during planting and harvest seasons. During periods of fasting when meat was forbidden, cheese provided much-needed strength without breaking religious rules. It was easy to portion, simple to serve, and durable enough to last until needed. For travelers arriving hungry and exhausted, a piece of salted cheese and bread could mean the difference between collapse and recovery. In this way, Brine supported not only the physical survival of monasteries, but also their mission of charity and hospitality. Monasteries often produced more brined cheese than they could consume. This surplus became an important economic resource. Salted cheeses were sold or traded in nearby towns, generating income that supported building repairs, manuscript production, and agricultural operations. Because brine cheese traveled well, monasteries could participate in broader trade networks without fear of spoilage. Brine, therefore, became part of institutional knowledge passed carefully from one generation of monks to the next. Preserving food was seen as a form of labor with spiritual value, a disciplined practice that served both God and community. Across the shifting borders of medieval Iberia, brine goat cheese quietly played another important role. It enabled trade between Christian and Muslim regions. Political conflict was frequent, borders changed often, and tensions remained high. Yet commerce rarely stopped. Markets thrived along frontier zones, and caravan routes crossed cultural and religious divides. In such environments, food that could survive heat, distance, and delay was deeply valuable. Brined cheese, protected by salt, could travel safely through semi-arid plains and long trade corridors without spoiling. Muslim merchants valued brined goat cheese for journeys near desert regions where heat destroyed most fresh foods. Christian traders trusted it for long coastal voyages across the Mediterranean. Because the cheese remained stable, both sides could buy and sell with confidence. In bustling markets from Toledo to Granada, barrels of salted cheese appeared alongside spices, textiles, metalwork, and grain. Brined cheese became part of a shared economic system that operated beyond faith and politics. Through the quiet reliability of brine, everyday trade continued, even when diplomacy failed. Goat cheese brine also held strategic importance in Iberian military life. Soldiers stationed at frontier forts or remote castles needed food that could endure long storage and extreme temperatures. Supply lines were unreliable, and fresh provisions were often unavailable. Brined goat cheese fit military needs perfectly. It was dense, rich in energy, and resistant to spoilage. Soldiers could carry it on long marches without fear of it turning rancid. In harsh borderlands, where heat and isolation threatened morale, brine cheese became a dependable ration. During sieges, brine cheese proved especially valuable. When fresh supplies were cut off and fields lay outside enemy lines, stored food meant survival. Cheese preserved in salt could last for months, providing protein and fat when nothing else remained. Military supply records from Christian kingdoms frequently list salted cheese as a standard provision. Its importance was logistical as much as nutritional. In many cases, Hunger ended battles before weapons ever did. Brined cheese quietly helped armies endure where desperation might otherwise have forced surrender. At the same time, cheesemaking itself became a powerful marker of regional identity across Iberia. From one region to another, artisans shaped goat cheese according to local traditions. After forming the curds, they submerged the cheese in brine vats, where salt slowly penetrated the surface. This process hardened the cheese, extended its life, and shaped its flavor. The exact strength of the brine and the length of immersion varied from place to place, giving each region its own signature style. Cheeses such as those from Tronchon or Murcia gained reputations tied directly to their brining methods. Without salt and water, these cheeses would never have survived the journey to market, let alone gained fame beyond their villages. Generations of cheesemakers refined their techniques, passing them down as carefully as family names. In many regions, the taste of cheese reflected local climate, skill, and experience. Brine was not merely a preservation tool, it became a cultural force, helping define Iberia's culinary identity in a land shaped by heat, distance, and survival. Economically, goat cheese brine reshaped rural life across medieval Iberia in ways that reached far beyond the farmyard. Fresh cheese was fragile, valuable only if consumed quickly and locally. Once brine, however, goat cheese gained a new status. Merchants trusted it because it could endure heat, time, and travel without collapsing into waste. This trust changed everything. Traders loaded firm, salted wheels into wooden barrels and strapped them onto mule trains heading toward major cities and ports. Others packed them into ships bound for Valencia, Lisbon, or Malaga, confident that the cheese would survive scorching inland roads or humid sea air. Brine acted like invisible armor. It protected the product long after it left the shepherd's hands, reducing risk in an economy where a single spoiled cargo could ruin a year's income. In a world without refrigeration or insurance, brined cheese became one of the safest goods a rural producer could offer. This reliability opened distant markets to people who had once been locked into local trade. Shepherds in remote hills and cheesemakers in small villages could now sell their work beyond nearby towns. Brining allowed their labor to travel farther than they ever could themselves. Middlemen and merchants became willing partners, knowing the cheese would arrive intact weeks or even months later. For rural households, this meant cash income in seasons when little else could be sold. During droughts, failed harvests, or years of conflict, brined goat cheese often remained one of the few stable sources of value. What began as survival food slowly became a commodity, one that connected rocky pastures to urban markets and ports. Over time, this flow of preserved cheese helped tie isolated regions into wider economic networks, strengthening both village livelihoods and regional trade. As brined goat cheese moved through markets and kitchens, it also shaped cultural life across medieval Iberia. Written cookbooks from both Christian and Muslim households mention salted cheeses as dependable ingredients. These texts reveal practical creativity. Brined cheese appeared in sauces thickened to withstand heat, folded into pastries meant to last beyond a single day, or layered with grains and vegetables in dishes designed for storage as much as flavor. Preservation influenced cooking style itself. Recipes were built around ingredients that could survive warm climates without spoilage. The steady presence of salted cheese made it possible to plan meals ahead, to cook in larger batches, and to feed households consistently even when fresh food was scarce. Medical thinking of the time further supported the value of brine cheese. Physicians, influenced by Greco-Arabic theories, believed food should balance the body against climate and labor. Brined goat cheese was praised for its durability and mineral strength. Salt, they argued, helped preserve both food and the person consuming it. Medical texts and advice often recommended salted cheese for travelers, farmers, and laborers who needed steady energy over long hours in the sun. It was seen as practical nourishment rather than indulgence. This approval reinforced its role in daily life, placing brine cheese at the intersection of diet, health, and environmental adaptation. At the household level, brined goat cheese became part of the rhythm of ordinary meals. In rural homes and urban dwellings alike, it was commonly eaten with bread, olives, and wine. These foods formed the backbone of Mediterranean survival, each chosen for its ability to endure heat and time. The sharp, salty flavor of the cheese shaped regional tastes over generations. People grew accustomed to preserved foods with strong character. Rather than seeing saltiness as harsh, it came to signal nourishment and safety. Over time, this preference became tradition, passed down as naturally as recipes or customs. What people ate reflected where they lived and what their land demanded of them. The knowledge required to produce and manage brine lived mostly outside written records. It was carried quietly through families and communities. Parents taught children how much salt to add, how to judge water by taste, how long cheese should rest beneath the surface. Clay jars used for brining were reused year after year, their rims crusted with old salt, their interiors shaped by habit. These vessels held more than food. They carried memory. Each jar represented lessons learned from heat waves, failed batches, and successful seasons. Brining was not treated as a specialized craft separate from life. It was woven into household identity, part of what it meant to belong to a place. Across medieval Iberia, goat cheese brine offered reassurance in a world defined by uncertainty. Peasants relied on it to stretch scarce resources. Monks depended on it to feed large communities. Soldiers trusted it to sustain them through marches and sieges. Merchants counted on it to protect their investments. In every setting, brine turned fragile milk into something dependable. It allowed planning in a climate that rarely allowed ease. Through the simple pairing of salt and water, people learned to shape food to survive heat, distance, and time. Brined goat cheese was not merely preserved nourishment. It was proof that careful knowledge and patience could carve stability out of a demanding land. By the later centuries of medieval Iberia, goat cheese brine had become deeply embedded in both economy and culture, reaching far beyond humble kitchens into trade routes, medicine, and lasting identity. Across villages and towns, brined goat cheese was no longer merely a survival food, but a reliable commodity that connected remote shepherd communities to busy ports like Valencia, Lisbon, and Malaga. Because the cheese could endure heat, time, and long travel, merchants trusted it as a stable good, packing barrels onto mules and ships with confidence that the cargo would not spoil under the Mediterranean sun or coastal humidity. For rural families, this durability meant economic security. Even when harvest failed or drought struck the land, brine cheese continued to sell, providing income when little else could. Over generations, this preservation method transformed goat herding from subsistence labor into a dependable livelihood. At the same time, brined goat cheese shaped daily life and belief. Medieval cookbooks from both Christian and Muslim households repeatedly referenced salted cheeses in dishes designed to resist heat and time, while physicians, influenced by Greco-Arabic medical traditions, praised brined cheese for its mineral balance and endurance. often recommending it to travelers, laborers, and soldiers. In homes across Iberia, meals built around bread, olives, wine, and salted cheese reflected a food culture shaped by climate and necessity. The sharp, salty flavor became familiar, even comforting, shaping regional tastes that favored preserved foods capable of surviving harsh seasons. Knowledge of brining itself became a form of inheritance. Families passed down clay jars, salt ratios, and curing habits as quietly as property or land, preserving not just food, but wisdom. Over time, the act of submerging cheese into brine came to symbolize foresight and resilience, a small ritual that pushed back against hunger and uncertainty. In monasteries, markets, military garrisons, and peasant homes, the same simple mixture of salt and water served different needs, but the same purpose: stability. In the end, goat cheese brine was not merely a technique, but a form of survival chemistry born from climate pressure. In one of Europe's hottest and most demanding environments, brine allowed fragile milk to become a long-lasting, nourishing resource that could endure drought, distance, and time. It fed monks and soldiers, sustained shepherds and traders, and carried communities through years of scarcity. Through salt and water, medieval Iberia learned to protect itself not through abundance, but through ingenuity, leaving a legacy that still echoes in the region's food traditions today.